Welcome to the Fit for Success podcast. Brian Semling is an experienced entrepreneur with over 25 years in business. He is the founder and CEO of Blitz Innovation. He has built several brands such as Brian's Toys, a collectible toy business, to several Amazon FBA brands like Strictly Bricks and Clever Creations. His latest adventure is Rovux, a modern athleisure footwear brand which can be found at rovuxfootwear.com. On the podcast, Brian will talk with other entrepreneurs and social media influencers about their entrepreneurial journey, from what it takes to start and run a business to how they may continue to grow their brands and where they see themselves in their businesses in the future. And now, here's your host, Brian Semling.
Welcome to the Fit for Success podcast. I'm Brian Semling. Today, our guest is Dumebi Egbuna, the co-founder and CMO of Chezie. Welcome, Dumebi.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and your business and how you got started.
Okay, so I am a 25-year-old Nigerian immigrant. I am the co-founder and CMO of Chezie, like you said, and Chezie is a software or an all-in-one solution that helps companies manage and track their employee resource groups. To give you some backstory, so I worked at a very large technology firm for about 2 years. My brother worked at a very large consulting firm. So being Black and being a woman in my case, we just knew what it was like to face microaggressions in the workplace, to not necessarily feel like you completely belonged in your workplace or your workplace environment. And we wanted to set out and kind of do something about that. So when we launched Chezie back in June 2020, our original idea was to be like a Glassdoor for minorities, with the idea that I could find out what it's like to be at a Black woman at a Facebook or a Google, and someone who had different identities, whether it be like LGBTQ plus or veteran or disability, whatever it may be. They can learn more about the minority experience so they can make more informed career decisions. So we ran that platform for about 9-10 months, and the business model, it was going to be free for job seekers, but our business model or how we would make money is to be more of a recruiting platform for companies. And we tried to do that for about 9 months, but we found that recruiting was a very crowded space, especially given the events of 2020 with Black Lives Matter. A lot of companies really pivoted and opened their eyes to being like, oh, we need to hire and recruit more diverse talent. So, job platforms or job recruiting platforms are kind of popping up all over the place. So it was just a crowded space. It was hard for us to scale with that business model. So in March of 2021, we were like, how can we still, accomplish our mission of helping minorities find jobs and careers that they love while having a scalable business? And that's when we pivoted our focus to being on employee resource groups. I guess for those who don't know what employee resource groups are, they are kind of little mini communities within organizations. So think of it as like a Black at Facebook or a women at Google. So it's like mini communities of like identity people within an organization, and they can kind of have their safe space to collaborate and express their grievances or issues or get policy changes within the company. So we wanted to focus on employee resource groups. So we built a software that helps companies, track membership, track events, engagement, et cetera. We know that employee resource groups are kind of the core of a lot of companies' DEI strategy, but they are oftentimes underfunded and under-resourced. So we wanted to give a platform and a tool that ERG leaders and DEI managers could use to just automate some of those manual tasks and to focus more on the activities that drive, retention and recruitment.
Cool. And it sounds like you had some success getting that moving forward. You're signing up enterprise level clients.
Yes.
So congratulations with that. And you, like, I guess so many other startup founders have learned that what you imagine going in is not exactly where the market isn't exactly what you expect when you get in. Maybe you don't even know what to expect. Right. And so I'm glad that you took that leap of faith. You're pivoting to where you found the market to be kind of a niche as well. I mean, that's kind of what we all have to kind of look for, as a niche that we can serve and, find clients and so forth that are willing to pay for our services. So glad to hear that is working well. You've told us about the major pivot. Any other challenges that you want to share with us that, in your first year and a half or so of being in business?
Yeah, I think one of our major challenges starting out was just that DEI is just still a relatively new space for a lot of companies. A lot of companies are just now implementing like DEI managers or chief diversity officers, et cetera. So you still kind of have to prove the business case. And I think just coming from the perspective of both of us being Black founders, that's inherent to our experience. We're always thinking about diversity and inclusion. We're always thinking about, wanting to work at workplaces that foster this sense of inclusion, foster this sense of belonging. But when you're selling to people outside of the minority identity, you kind of have to build out the business case behind that. So I think that was a major challenge for us. Just from a naive perspective, we didn't realize that some people didn't understand, why diversity and inclusion is necessary or why they should be investing resources and money into some of their diversity and inclusion initiatives.
So at this point, you're, let's say you're better positioned to communicate on multiple levels, probably the return on investment, maybe. Is that is that a way to put it?
For sure. And I think especially with the pivot to employee resource groups, like you said, it is a niche. It is a niche market. So people who are already having and establishing employee resource groups within their organizations, typically they have diversity and inclusion managers or councils, or they already kind of get the business case behind it. So we're not having to have that first conversation.
They already have a budget and a department, et cetera. You're helping them be more effective.
Right.
So you don't have to explain to them, you do have to justify return on investment of your service.
Right.
But maybe not the bigger picture is what you're saying.
Not the bigger picture of this is why you should be investing in diversity and inclusion as a whole.
And I can imagine for a startup if you're starting at that level, like what you were describing a minute ago, that it could take a while to get to the point where you're bringing in revenue.
Yeah.
And that might not be good for a startup, basically, where you need not just invest for 2 or 3 years, but you need to survive for the next 2 or 3 years before you can afford to have potential prospects come along and join you down the road, basically. So what do you think it takes to make a successful entrepreneur? What are some of the traits? What are some of the things that you've had to do to, we've talked about pivoting, but what are, beyond that, what do you see as it taking you to become successful as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think one of the major things that we've really spent a lot of time in is learning from other founders or learning from people who have entrepreneurial experience. When we were first starting, both my brother and I are first-time founders. We didn't even know what we didn't know. You're looking at business taxes or getting certified as a corporation and all these things. We had no idea how to even start, but just getting a network of people who are willing to provide advice and kind of that free guidance and mentorship is kind of crucial for the startup journey. As well as having just a business plan, just mapping out where you want to be in 6 months, where you want to be in a year. My brother and I have implemented an OKR kind of weekly checkpoint where we have our objectives and then the key results and tasks that are going to get us to those objectives, and just checking in weekly to see where we are. I think it's important to kind of track based on KPIs and just having those set metrics that you can measure success against. And then, like you said, just not being afraid to pivot when you see something's not working. It's all about failing fast and moving on to the next thing.
I like what you said, or how you said about not knowing what you don't know. And I think that's true. I found myself saying that many times throughout life and business, and just being aware that you don't know everything is good. And even as you progress along, you still, you can be in business 10, 20 plus years, and there's still a lot you don't know, and the world changes. So what you did know isn't, but just having that awareness that you don't know what you don't know, and being willing to, ask for help and ask questions.
You definitely have to be humble in this business. You can't take the approach of it all, because there's definitely some things that you don't know. So again, it's all about building up that network of people who can provide that guidance. And I think that's.
What are some misconceptions that people might have about owning a business or starting a business now that you've done it for a little over a year and a half? What are things that people who haven't done it before might not know?
Yeah. Well, one, I would say it takes a while to transition to full time. I think a lot of people think once you get that idea of a business, you're just going to quit your day job and go work on this thing. But I would say be patient in that. If you have a day job or a 9 to 5 that gives you flexible hours and it's also paying you a full salary, utilize that to your advantage. Like you might not be taking a salary from your startup for a while. So using that money from your 9 to 5 to fund your business is something that I would always, advise. And then I'd say it's not a glamorous lifestyle, especially in the beginning. It's like a lot of, working nights, working weekends, working late hours. It's a lot of like hustling, like following up with emails to people 10, 12 times, until you get a response. Like it takes a lot of resilience, and it's not necessarily easy.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't start out making millions of dollars basically
Yeah.
in the second week, right?
Yeah.
You
Exactly.
have to be frugal and creative and persistent and all kind of the things that you were describing here, and humble for sure, right? So yeah, that's all good stuff. And there's no money coming in until there's money coming in, right? Like you're responsible for that.
Yeah, my brother and I have taken the bootstrapping approach where we aren't fundraising. So we have been applying to a lot of grants, a lot of, pitch competitions, just like getting money that way as opposed to going to investors and giving up equity. So there's also a grind and a hustle in itself, is like finding grants that appeal to, minority owned businesses or socially conscious businesses, and doing those applications, doing pitch competitions. Like it's definitely not a glamorous lifestyle. We're not Jeff Bezos yet. So
right. I like what you said about keeping your job if you are able to while you're starting, because you don't necessarily have 60 hours of work to do the first week that you start, the first month that you start, maybe even the first year that you start. And you certainly aren't likely to have money coming in right away, especially if you don't already have fundraising lined up, right? And I think back when I started my business, I was in high school. I lived with my parents. I could afford to take a chance, and it didn't really cost me anything because of that. So it's just kind of like the sooner you can start, probably the better.
Right.
And if you have, in my case, it was my parents and still being a high school student. In your case, or in other cases, it might be that you have a job that's salaried and you can work whatever it is, 2, 3, 6 hours after, or maybe weekends or whatever it is, kind of cushions it, reduces your risk some, basically, right?
For sure. And I think it's a huge privilege to have something to fall back on. So like you said, you're not making money as soon as you start the business, so just to have that cushion of, I have my set salary, I can live off this, and I can still do what I need to do in that day job, but also maintain and grow my own entrepreneurial business.
Yeah. And ideally eventually get to the point where you're like, I don't have, business is starting to work now. It needs more of me. You can then reassess the situation for financing and see like what, can you afford to do that? Or what's the cost of, what's the personal cost of that to get by on less money, perhaps for a while. What's it like to work with your brother? Not just work with him, but obviously partner with him and so forth.
Rovox, where fashion meets fitness.
Yeah, I always say I wouldn't want to do this with anyone else. One, we just shared so many experiences while we were working in corporate America, and just having those conversations throughout that about, just being Black in a predominantly white setting, and what it's like to face those microaggressions and maybe even some discrimination within the workplace. It was nice to have someone who's going through the exact same thing at the exact same time. And then I've also just found that we work together really well. He is definitely like an executioner. Like he will have an idea, he will go execute. And while I can be like that, that's not necessarily my default. So he pushes me to be, more disciplined in that way. And then I am also very good at just like reminding him about how far we've come. I think that's important, especially in the founder's journey, is to give yourself some grace and to realize, like, look back and be like, we've had a lot of major success, and it's not something that everyone has experienced, and just being a gentle reminder of that. So we balance each other out, I would say.
Good.
Yeah.
So in doing all this and obviously being busy with your business, what do you do to find time for a fit and healthy lifestyle?
Yeah. You might not know this, but I used to play basketball in college. So I have always kind of been active throughout my life. I still try and work out 3-4 times a week, maintain a pretty balanced diet. I will have my cheat days and my cheat meals and whatever, but I just try and do everything in moderation. And then I'm very big like on self-care. So going to get my nails done, going to get my hair done, whatever it may be. So
Cool. Still play any basketball at all?
Not really. I think after college, I was just kind of like, you know what, I'm done with it. So I transitioned to doing more like cardio and weightlifting stuff.
There you go. All right.
Yeah.
In what ways do you find, I guess, how do you balance between business and personal life, especially as you've, obviously been in the middle of startup mode? What are some of the things that you do to make that work, and maybe some of the challenges that are tough?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is tough, but I think I found people in my life who get that I am on this journey of trying to build and scale this business. So they're really accommodating, but I have to set boundaries of like, when I'm with my friends, I'm with my friends. I'm not going to check email until after I get home, or when I'm with my boyfriend, I'm with my boyfriend. I'm not going to work on a pitch deck. So it's just about like planning. I really am good at like planning out my days. If I know I'm going to have a dinner later, I'll try and get work done before that, or know that I'll set some time out after it. It's just about boundaries.
Yeah. Keeping some separation basically. And
exactly. Yeah. And I mean, sometimes I say that, sometimes it does all kind of melt together, but I feel like that's life.
I know that for all of us, like, this doesn't leave too far from
right. Exactly.
That doesn't mean we don't try basically, and exactly. Do our best. So we've had a good discussion today, and I'm glad to learn about you and your business and so forth. Are there any questions that you wish I'd asked today that I haven't gotten to?
Well, I know that you had mentioned that you had pivoted a couple of times with your own business. I'd just love to learn more about that.
Yeah.
I'm sure similarities, and I know we probably worked in different fields, but I'm sure there's some similarities in like finding an issue and addressing it and pivoting and being able to scale and be successful at something else.
Yeah, happy to do that. Let me think back. So when I first started the business back in 1994, I was a junior in high school. Things went pretty smoothly. Like from the beginning, I collected Star Wars toys as a hobby, so I kind of knew what I was doing. Invested a few $1,000s, was working on my parents' garage and basement. And I didn't have any pressure on me because I didn't really need to make money per se. And things went pretty well. So there was no pivot initially. It was like, all right, it took time. By the third year though, I was like rocking and rolling busy, and I left MIT, where I was a sophomore at that point, because business was going well. So it wasn't until the recession in 2007 and 2008, all of a sudden, for the first time now for me in 14 years, people were not spending money like they had forever, from my standpoint, before that.
Right.
Our sales were down like 30% in the third quarter of 2008 over the prior year's third quarter. And so that made me nervous. Like, all right, are we making money? Are we going to lose money? We owe money to the bank for inventory. Like, what are we going to do? So I prayed about it. And a couple of things that came to mind for me were, one is I thought back to, all right, well, my business 5 years earlier was 40% smaller. So I thought, well, gosh, while that isn't awesome, like we used to survive like at a smaller level, we made money and we were fine. So that gave me the idea of like, all right, we could look at our expenses and let's plan for getting our expenses in line for a 40% drop in revenue, which was possible. And so I kind of had that mentality on the one hand. The other hand, it was like, what's working right now?
Right.
So 80% of our business at this time was through our own website and catalog. 10% about was from eBay, and 10% was Amazon. So during this, this year, this quarter, especially where things were really rough, what stood out was our Amazon sales were up. I don't know the percentage, but let's say 20, 30%. Not enough to matter in a good year. You'd barely notice 10% going to 12, right? Like you might notice it, you might not. But when everything else is like from 100 down to 70 and your 10 is up to 12, it stood out basically. So that part of my business was, that small part of my business was doing well. So we quickly pivoted, when I say quickly, like within the course of several months, to focusing on, instead of using Amazon as a small part of our business and sales channel, we started to make that a bigger and bigger part of our business. And a couple of years later, like 70-80% of our sales were through Amazon. Instead of being just a specialist in Star Wars and collectible toys, we did keep that focus, but we added a diversification of all sorts of toys.
Right.
Got into closeout toys, particularly for Mattel, Hasbro, and some other large toy companies. And so we became a niche player in closeout toys on Amazon. And it happened out of necessity, kind of, not quite the same as a startup, but for sure the mentality of having to do it because you're in trouble, like that was certainly similar. My next pivot was at a high level was in 2014. We were actually doing quite well this time. So this was not a different, it didn't come from a like need of, the sky is falling, we got to find something here. But I did see that our closeout business, I didn't think that we were going to continue to be able to grow it or grow it well. Like it seemed like it had kind of run its course. And it was like maybe going to be steady, maybe going to be declining, but it didn't seem like it had the upside potential that it had 5 years earlier. And so that was when I launched several Amazon brands or brands that were, consumer brands that were really focused on selling on Amazon. So one was Strictly Bricks, which was brick construction, toys, creative play, compatible with Lego. We did lots of base plates, 36 different colors. We made them stackable, lots of fun. So that was one brand. I did that with some insight in the toy industry, and we had sold some Lego products, and I had little kids at that time that were like 8 and 5, they're 14 and 11 now, something like this. And we did Clever Creations, which is what you see behind me is Christmas nutcrackers, wooden nutcrackers. That was another brand we started in 2015, and Clever Chef was a kitchen brand. So those I tried as experiments. I'd say for our business, they were pretty large experiments, but they were still kind of experiments for 2015. And I still kept going with the closeout toys, but with an eye of like 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out the door. The experiment went well enough with the 3 brands I described to effectively exit closeout toys at the end of 2015 and to really go pedal to the metal with the 3 brands that I described. And we went from about $500,000 in sales with Strictly Bricks in 2015 to about $5 million in 2019. And the other brands, into the upper 6 and into the 7 digits as well. So basically, that was kind of where I didn't see a bright future where we were at, but we were still actually very profitable and doing well to just trying something new and exiting. And then more recently, like in the last 6 months, I sold Strictly Bricks, the brand, that part of our business, and have had interest in acquiring and growing other online brands or businesses. So Robux Footwear was a business that I purchased back in October of 2021, just like 4 months ago now. Sure. And that one is not on Amazon. We sell on robuxfootwear.com primarily through social media and advertising through Facebook, Instagram, Google, etc. So I guess some of that has been driven by my own interest in doing new things and building. And some of that has come from necessity or at least concern, if not necessity, over the future. So,
and I like how you use the word experimenting. I feel like we've definitely experimented. Like we'll take an idea, but then we'll go back to, the DEI managers or the ERG leaders that we've talked to in the past. And they're like, oh, this is a good idea. Or no, maybe, this is something that you put out later. We're not ready for this. I'm not sure if company's ready for this. So we definitely utilize that idea of, experimenting with new features, new products.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy, you kind of have to be open and hopefully you like experimenting because you kind of have to.
You have to.
A word I didn't use, but I like to use in describing this is adventure.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a positive and fun word, but yet it is not for the faint of heart necessarily, right? Like it's not necessarily always a Disney adventure. Sometimes it's like, but it's fun. And certainly I enjoyed the, kind of like taking a concept or an idea and bringing it to reality and then growing it. And then I think once I've done that, once I've taken it to the place where it's difficult to grow, or at least our ability is, that's where it gets to be, for me, more interesting to move to something else that is where I can apply, new experiments, new
Right.
ideas, and and keep going basically. So now, obviously, if you find something you can keep growing for decades at double-digit growth, then maybe you don't ever switch off that track. You just keep going basically. That sometimes works out, sometimes that doesn't. But I enjoy the journey, and it sounds like you are as well. And just good to hear that you're moving forward, succeeding, and good luck with
Thank you.
everything. Any other questions or anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean, if your audience is interested in learning more, you can visit chezie.co, not com.co. And then we're also on Instagram at Chezie HQ and on LinkedIn at Chezie. So would love to, hear from your audience, and would love to give out demos or answer any questions they may have.
Very good. And let's spell Chezie just for clarity.
Yeah, Chezie.
All right. Well, sounds good. Well, thank you very much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's been great. I'm Brian Semling. This is the Fit for Success podcast.